Welcome to the Divergent Hope podcast. This is a place where we can have open and honest discussion about all the different ways we can explore our relationship with God through Jesus Christ. Hosted by Laurel Coolbaugh. Let's get into today's episode.
Welcome back to the Divergent Hope podcast. And today we are going to be talking about silence, that wonderful spiritual practice. It really is wonderful. And today we have with us Latha. Welcome back, Latha. So glad you're here.
Good to be here.
Yeah. And we have today, for the first time, Dorian.
Great to be here.
Dorian. Yeah, great to have you. Dorian is pastor here, executive pastor at Faith Community Church, and just altogether a wonderful person. So we're so glad you're here.
Well, thank you, Laurel.
You're welcome. So, we're talking about silence, especially in light of the Lenten season, and not that silence is at all only something you can practice then, but often people do choose to practice spiritual practices in Lent. And certainly when this airs, it will be Holy Week, so that's a wonderful time, particularly, to be silent and lean in closer to God. So what initially drew both of you to this spiritual discipline in the first place, and how long have you been engaged with it?
Okay, I guess it took me a long time to get to where I am at right now. I remember almost 16 years ago, a friend had recommended this movie called Into Great Silence, and it's about this, I hope I'm saying this right, Carthusian monks in France. Mm-hmm. It's just recording their rhythms of life, daily living, and at that time I was like, okay.
Yeah.
It didn't really do much for me. And now I think back about how that might have been a seed that was on rocky soil.
Yeah.
And I didn't really have a chance to grow. I was living a very busy, fast lane, roller coaster of work and busyness and all this striving and achieving, right? Back then. Right. And so it didn't really take root. Mm-hmm. I realized once, I remember a little bit of a story. I had a conference call with China at 8 o'clock in the morning. So I go rushing into work, driving into Boston early morning. I get out of the car and it's like I must have stepped out wrong. And I've had this excruciating pain and I thought I was going to pass out, and I held on to the car door. And I just, prayed to God and was okay after a minute.
Yeah.
And then went through the day. It was very busy without noticing much. And I come back home and I'm putting up my feet on the couch and my foot is swollen. And I went through the day without any self-awareness of just so focused on work.
Oh my.
And that's when it was like a wake-up call. How do you just numb your senses that much in this busyness? Mm-hmm. And after that, and after several nudges from friends who saw I was just on the road to burnout, that I went and signed up for a silent meditation retreat. Mm-hmm. And that began my journey into practicing stillness and silence.
How was that first one for you, especially since that's a great story actually of how unaware you realized you were. But how was that first time? Was it painful or was it tell us a little bit about that.
So this meditation retreat was almost like very ascetic lifestyle.
Yeah.
I liked the principles and that's what I said, okay, I could try this. Mm-hmm. Maybe it was initially from a stress reduction kind of a, meditation silence retreat. And they practiced what they said was total cut off from any kind of distraction. So no phones, no Wi-Fi, no books, no reading, nothing. So you had to practice total silence, not even talking or nonverbal communication with your eyes or smiling at anybody, even when you came across them in a dining hall.
Yeah.
And I was like, the biggest worry I had back then was that they would only give you breakfast and lunch and no dinner, because that's what the monks did. And I was like, how am I going to sleep? And it's 10, 12 hours of sitting in silence. I thought I could do the silence because I'm used to solitude.
Right.
But I wasn't sure I could do it without dinner.
Right.
But after a couple of days, it was just like, your body is so adaptable. You didn't even miss the dinner. And for the first 2 days, I was like, I'm not getting this. I don't think this is doing anything for me.
Yeah.
Quieting, and I'll get into that.
Right.
Stilling the mind was so challenging.
Yeah.
And I was thinking, okay, I'm going to give it one more day. And if it doesn't work, it's a 10-day.
Yeah.
I'm just going to say, this is not for me. I'm going to leave.
Right.
And on the third day, I started sensing and being awareness of the breath and the spirit working.
Wow.
And that's when it was like, this is powerful.
Oh, gosh.
And then the rest of the time, amazingly, went by quick.
Yeah.
And I was able to stay all 10 days.
Incredible.
Yeah.
Especially for the first time. I
Yes.
think. Wow. To step into 10 days of it? Oh, my gosh. Very good. How about you, Dorian? Tell us.
Well, it wasn't that.
I know.
10 days is your first experience. That's impressive.
Yeah,
that's
it
impressive.
is. It is.
Interesting story about Integrate Silence. That movie was shared with me, and little anecdote. Apparently, when the producers first came to the community, they refused to have them recorded,
Right.
and they sent them away. And they only got back to them 10 to 12 years later.
16
and
years
said,
later.
How many years?
16.
16 years later. Thank you.
Yeah.
And said, we're now ready for you to come.
Yes.
That's a different pace of life. That's
that.
a different
Yes.
pace of life. So what initially drew me in was your question, right? It was a desire for peace. It was trying to get away from freneticism, franticness, kind of pressure and demands from others, a desire for peace and a desire to grow deeper in my relationship with God. I was just getting to a point where devotions felt like chores, attendance at church felt like duty. I was a pastor at the time, and so it was a requirement. And there was just a loss of connection. And so this was in reading, diving into Richard Foster's Celebration of Discipline. His whole middle section of the book are what I call the 5 S's: silence, solitude, service, submission. I forget what the 5th one is right now, but silence and solitude were primary. And so wanted to try to practice them. So I was curious. Not 10 days curious. I was like, let's start small. So for me, it was little iterations, right? In a community I was in, practicing for 5 minutes, then taking it to an hour, then going a little further, trying a retreat where we were overnight in silence. And those sort of rhythms have stuck with me. I enjoy those, and we'll talk more about that in a little bit. But that was for me, this desire to connect, to grow, and to find peace.
So when you did it first, Dorian, was it, I understand it was at a different pace than Latha's first experience, but how was it initially for you when you entered in? Was it like, what did you feel?
Oh, frustrating.
Oh, okay.
It was completely frustrating. I grew up in a Greek house with an extroverted mom.
Yeah.
And some people who know me and have met my mom know, like, she's a force to be reckoned with, right? Pink hair and, invasive and wonderful and loving and everything you see in the Big Fat Greek Wedding movie. So that was my home life.
Yeah.
Was vibrancy and joy and loud and frenetic.
Yeah.
And so when I first practiced silence, it just felt weird.
Right.
Everybody's quiet. You talk about the stillness of the mind. There was no stillness of the mind. It was stillness of the tongue, and the mind was busy and crazy. And so there was a hunger to try to fill that void. but it took time.
Yeah.
But yeah, it was frustrating at first.
Right. Which I think is, at least from what I've heard, is often people's first experience. Like, how do I do this? Why do I do this? My mind, I can't get it to turn off, and that's even worse than just letting your mouth keep going. So, yeah. And I just want people to understand that that's normal,
Right.
But to keep going with it. Yeah.
It's part of the process.
It is. It is part of the process. Yeah.
Yeah, I think if it isn't frustrating, I would probably say you're doing it wrong. And by that, what I mean is it's a new skill. Mm-hmm. So when you start it right off the bat, we think about being silent as not speaking.
No.
But when you talk about silence as a stillness of the mind, a stillness of the heart, and Mama Maggie, who's a consecrated Coptic Christian, gave a talk on silence, and she gives this quote about, I need to still my tongue so that I can still my mind. I'm paraphrasing now. I need to still my mind so that I can still my heart. Mm-hmm. I need to still my heart so that I can still my soul.
Mm-hmm. I love that.
And then I can enter into true silence. Mm-hmm. And then she shared this. She goes, it takes me 3 days of silence of not speaking to get to the silence of the heart for her.
Yeah.
And that is something that just takes time. So when we think it's just stop speaking for a period of time, it will be frustrating because we won't get what we think we're going to get.
Right.
And we're not talking about silence like the movies project, these monks who take these great vows of silence for a year, all the comedy that goes around that. This is about a spiritual discipline and a rhythm of practice that is different.
Absolutely. So tell me more about your evolution, both of you, your evolution of practicing this. So you've talked about your beginning, what it was like. Tell me more about the process of then till now.
Sure, I'll go because you're going to talk about 10 days. So for me, it was small. So, read the book by Richard Foster, had read a couple of other things. So I just started with a few minutes. Mm-hmm. And literally with a clock, timed it, spent some time just not talking. Mm-hmm. And then over the course of practicing, that time went from a few minutes and I grew it to a couple of hours. Mm-hmm. And it just built, so small and slow building, and it grew to days where I went on a retreat and we had an overnight time of silence. I would opt out of engaging in speaking or interacting to have times of silence. I would build them into a rhythm of my year. Mm-hmm. That was all back in South Africa. And then when we moved to the States, I need to tell you that coming to America was like stepping into a fast-moving train. Mm-hmm. In South Africa, when I grew up there, I don't know if it's still like this, there was times of pauses and silence on the radio. So somebody would speak, there'd be a gap, there'd be a commercial, there'd be a break from the commercial. Like you could plot, there was still air.
Wow.
And I remember being here in America for the first 2 weeks and listening to the radio and going, they never stop. Mm-mm. Like dead air was the enemy. And so they just filled everything. And even to the point that, sometimes on the radio you hear those sped up, the legal stuff they have to give, so they put it at double speed.
Right.
And I was going crazy, and I realized I had lost my rhythm with silence.
Yep.
And fortunately, the church I was at the time, Grace Chapel, they were feeling the same pressure. So they hired Leadership Transformation, Steve Mucker, to come and lead the staff in reconnecting with silence. Mm-hmm. And we went to this retreat. I was feeling frayed completely. And Steve did this thing. I'm going to grab it. Mm-hmm. I'm just grabbing something right now. He pulled out at the start of a 36-hour retreat where we were going to spend 24 hours in silence, including a meal eaten together in community in silence. So he grabbed this bottle, murky like this one is, filled with dirt, and he shook it. And at the start of the retreat, he put it on the table in front of us. And he said, "That's your soul. And over the next 36 hours, we're going to spend time in meditative silence and let the junk float to the bottom and let the water clear up And so if you happen to be watching this through the course of our conversation, you'll see this start to clear. It's not going to get completely clear. That's not going to happen in 36 hours. You felt 3 days. But that was kind of the process of growing and getting reconnected through that experience. And now silence is part of my daily, weekly, and annual rhythm that I have to have. Because if I don't have it, I feel that frayed rope again, especially in the society in which we live.
Wow, that's great. And how do you do it in a household with 2 teenage boys?
I wait for them to go to school.
Exactly. There you
That's
go.
smart.
Yeah, we would wait for them to go to school. I mean, I would do that. My wife and I talk about scheduled times where I can take overnight retreats or day trips, 3-day retreats away. I haven't quite got to 10 days, so I really feel I'm a baby in this when it comes to silence. I'm still learning. I'm not at the Mama Maggie. I don't think I'm at the 10-day level, but it is something that is a important part of the rhythm of how I operate. So it takes conversation. It takes a lot of talking and planning to find space for silence.
That's for sure. Yeah.
I will say it's worth it though, because doing that journey from the days, the weeks, even the few moments, the desire for peace came. I would find peace. I would experience that calmness.
Yeah.
There is a connection that you have with Jesus that is different through silence than any other spiritual activity. You can read the Bible, you can study great talks, you can read great blogs, all that sort of stuff, but there's something about sitting in silence with the Spirit that is just different. And out of that, and I don't know if you felt this, Latha, the love you feel and the connection with Christ is unbelievable.
Yeah.
Yes.
And it's always one of those things where after a day of silence, I'm like, why did it take so long to get back here? I love this. And then going back into the world is almost traumatizing because it's so loud. And so, yeah, this image of a murky bottle of water that needs to be distilled and allow yourself to marinate in what the Spirit is doing and be saturated by that kind of drove my desire and to get back into that rhythm.
That's excellent. What a great example here, or prop, as you said.
Well,
It's
not
great.
mine, but it's all Steve.
But it's very good, very good.
Good.
That's,
Latha, how about
that's
you?
great.
Yeah.
And I loved what you said about, when you first moved here, about the pause not being there, the power of the pause, right? And I used to always feel if I jumped into a conversation without that pause, I was interrupting, but I most often wouldn't even get a chance to speak because there never was a pause. And it just keeps going, right?
Right.
It is so fast-paced. But then over the years, I had adopted it, the fast pace of life.
Yeah.
And I think, like Dorian, I feel like it was very hard the first 2 days. And the first 3 days was the focus on the breath and how to feel the breath. And I loved the way they taught it because it's like we know God is everywhere, and it's hard to feel His or sense His presence.
Right.
He's in us,
Right.
around us.
Yeah.
And the breath is something that we carry with us all the time. As long as there's life, there is breath. And yet, how often are we conscious of breathing? We go through life, I would have gone through life totally unconscious of breathing.
Right.
You breathe in and breathe out without any consciousness. And to bring the attention to the breath, to make us aware and conscious of something that we do so unconsciously, was, for the first day, I'm like, what are they talking about? I don't feel anything.
Right.
I mean, focus on this nose and just the nasal area.
Yeah.
Don't allow any other distraction to enter.
Right.
Okay, you might feel, oh, my leg is going all, cramped, and I'm getting itchy here. Forget all that, ignore all that, and just focus on the nose and the breath. And I was like, 2 days go by, I'm like, not feeling a thing.
Yeah.
And the third day, it's like, I'm feeling, I'm only breathing through one nostril one time. Sometimes it's through the left, through the right. And then as it's coming out, I'm feeling below the nose, the tiny hair, that you can sense even that as the breath is going over it. I'm like, wow, there is a lot when you become aware and you tune out all of the noises and just focus on that. And then it connects you to the spirit within. And then you can sense so many things within your body. And that's the way I feel like you can tap into the awareness of God and the presence of God as we go around our day. So anytime I feel like I need to take a deep breath, the situation is getting out of control, or my emotions are getting out of hand. And that's when I can always go back to my breath and say, and that grounds me to the presence of God. The breath and, and in the Bible, I feel like we are often told, right? It is so vital, the breath of life, and yet it is fleeting. So there's the contradiction. We shouldn't hold on to things too much. Something so crucial to life, and yet it's a mere breath. In the Bible, it's referred to as a mere breath, or it's fleeting.
That's right.
So this whole practice is about not holding on, not attaching to too much to things.
That's right.
And releasing and surrendering to God. So.
And the irony in that, I mean, there's more than just this, but because when I started focusing on my breath, like you've talked about, in silence, and the irony of how the breath is so fleeting, but of course we can't begin to live without it. So it's everything for us. Again, it's powerful, like going there thinking about those things. My husband and I were talking with, we call him our Chinese son. He's like a son to us, and he lives in China. And he was exclaiming about when his daughter was born, and how he said, it's just amazing, this child who hasn't, who's been in the womb but not really breathing air, and then they come out and they just take that first breath of air. And his daughter's 4 now, but he was exclaiming about this. And so in my next time of silence, focusing on that breath, because of your tutelage in that too, thinking, what is that like? And then we had just had a good friend die, and within days of this. So I was thinking about her, and what is that like when you stop your breath here, but go into heaven? Anyway, just the focus on the breath is so powerful, what you think about. Yeah.
And in Genesis, when God breathed the breath of life after he created Adam, you know.
Absolutely.
And I also wanted to follow up on what you said. It's like when we get through the practice of the third day, and then you continue on for the 10 days. And it was much easier, I have to say. I have a harder time doing it at home with all the distractions, even though I don't have anybody else to disturb my calm or peace. It's just there's too many things, whether it's phone calls, texts, TV, emails, whatever it is, that keep, pinging us. And so when you go into an environment where all of that is taken away, you have no way of communicating with anybody, and then you're allowed to go deeper into that silence and have a laser focus on what's going on. Then towards the end of the 10 days, as you progress, the 6th day, 8th day, you just start to feel that awareness throughout your body, not just on your breath. And then that whole feeling of, it's almost like agape love, where you feel connected to everybody. And this whole thing of you're connected to God, who is the source of love, And you feel that love towards all of his creation and all the people. You don't see a separation from anybody at the end of it. It's like, and they end with a prayer of benevolence and, peace and goodwill and,
Beautiful.
blessing to everybody. So I just feel it's so powerful.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
How many years have you been doing that, Latha? The 10 days.
Yes. The 10 days I did 6 years ago, the first one. And then I would come back and do it at home. In the beginning, how it starts off is you're all motivated, you come back home, and the way they tell you is start with 1 hour in the morning and 1 hour at night. You end the day with silence. And I started off 1 hour. Then after a week goes by, the cares of the world again.
Right.
It becomes half an hour or 45 minutes, and so it went on like that, on and off. It wasn't very consistent in the time.
Yeah.
I couldn't maintain the 1 hour consistently.
Right.
And then I got busy with travel, and it falls by the wayside. I was working,
Yeah.
and for 5 years I didn't go back for another refresher or a retreat. And then when I tried to do it, it was always full. It's a very popular. And so I said, there is a service where you can actually go and serve. And they have more openings to serve. Where you're still meditating for about at least 4 hours a day.
Okay.
But you're helping in preparing the meals and serving, because they also end with how you have to give back.
Right.
And it's not just for your benefit.
Yes.
But you got to, help
Right.
others.
Right.
And so I signed up for that, and they were very good. They came back to me and said, well, we noticed that you hadn't done it for 5 years, so we think you'll benefit more from sitting. So we transferred you into that, and it was on a wait list, but they moved me up and bumped me.
Wow.
And I got in. And so I did that last year.
That's great.
Yeah, for the second time.
Excellent.
Just sitting. And that's like 10, 12 hours of, silence. And
Yeah.
So I think this is an important thing, because that could sound terrifying to somebody
Right.
who wants
Right.
to enter into this.
Yes.
And also somebody who can't give 10 days.
Right.
Or,
that was the biggest challenge.
That's
Yeah.
a big challenge.
Yeah.
Or I can't get 10 minutes to myself, never mind 2 hours in a day.
Right.
And this was something that was introduced, or the thought was introduced to me by Nancy Ortberg. She said when she reads about spiritual disciplines, especially silence and solitude, they seem to only be written by introverted white men. And I was like, hold on, what do you mean by that? And what she was saying is it always is about go away to the silent monastery, mystical place. And she says her best times of silence was sitting and having coffee at the local Panera. And it sparked in me this idea that silence doesn't mean absence of noise. It's about inner silence. And so one of my favorite ways to practice is to actually go to the Panera in Framingham, get there. I think I drive them crazy. Get there at like 10:30, 11. And as long as I'm not distracting and not taking seats away from people, I sit there and spend time in silence, not talking to anybody. There's plenty of noise around me. But in my mind, I'm focused on whether it's breathing or a phrase that I'm trying to kind of incorporate into my spirit, a word or a verse that I'm focusing on. I sometimes might journal, which is different to the retreat you're talking about, where it's you and your breath and nothing else.
Right.
Correct?
Yeah, sitting in silence.
And just sitting in silence, which I think some people need. If you are so busy in your life that you can't practice this at home, yes, you need to get the retreat center or the place to go. But it's also something you can practice in the midst of busyness, is to be a small, still space.
Yes.
I know silence and solitude go hand in hand, but they're not essential to each other.
Right.
You can practice silence in the midst of busyness, in the midst of community. This is becoming more and more popular in the business world outside of spirituality. I think it's Juliet Funt wrote the book White Space, arguing for we need to get space in our calendars, just the space between appointments, the white space in our calendars, that those are good things, and to build them in. I try to do that with silence. So I build into a day, here's a 60-second break, here's a 5-minute break, here's a half an hour break. That might mean I go for a walk around the offices where I work. It might mean at home I will pause and sit in silence. And here's the amazing thing about this is when you start listening to your body, you start identifying what your body really needs. That retreat where I was introduced to this bottle, one of the directors said to all of us as staff, you are so overworked. What might be good for you is not to sit in silence, but you might actually need to sleep. And so if you feel you need to sleep, go and sleep. I am fascinated by the fact that in our American culture in which we live, everybody's tired. If you ask people, how do you feel? I'm busy and tired.
That's
I'm
right.
busy and tired. Sometimes the silence you need is actually to shut down, to give yourself the nap, to give yourself the time off. Not a good job recommendation, by the way, to go to your boss and say, you know what, I'm going to practice some white noise and then go sleep on your desk. You need to coach them through that,
Right.
but give yourself the space to do that. I'm amazed when I feel that busyness overwhelming me, to go away on a 3-day retreat and to have the luxury of, you know what, my body says I need to stop. And so you stop. You sleep. You exercise, or you change that rhythm up, but you find that way to practice silence without necessarily the absence of others or the absence of noise.
Right.
I'm so glad you made that clarification, because it's not just going away to retreats.
Right.
That, it helps.
Absolutely helps, yes.
It nourishes you. It kind of builds your discipline, when you're feeling like you're falling by the wayside. But I love what you said, because it's almost like what Brother Lawrence says. He goes into the kitchen amidst the noise. That constant presence of God is with him amidst the noise. He can still his mind and still feel the presence of God, no matter where he is. Yeah.
And I loved what he wrote when he said, I enjoy my times of constant conversation with God and silence while I'm cleaning the kitchen or cooking. That the regular times of worship and prayer are distraction and interruption to my communion with God. And I'm like, don't think you want to be putting that in a book for your father to read or your boss to read. But that's how he felt.
Right.
That, and I have certainly found that. Like, there have been moments on retreats in silence where I'm so enjoying the silence that when we have to go back into community to share, I don't want to. Like, can I just stay here?
Right.
And you see that in the Bible. You see that in the Bible where people want to just stay with God. They enjoy that experience. Elijah is fascinating for me in this. Elijah, in the Bible, we read about him doing these fantastic things. He confronts the Baal priests. He calls down fire from heaven. He runs faster than a chariot. And I, in one sermon, wanted to find out how far that was. And it was like a marathon, like 26 miles, 30 miles. But then he fears for his life, and he flees away, and he goes south. It's about, I think it was about a 60 to 80 mile journey south. And he gets to the end of his rope where he wants to kill himself, and God says, go into the desert. And that's like a 300-mile journey. And I may be getting the mileages wrong.
Yeah.
But the idea was his times of energetic work for God were short. His time of fear running away were longer. But the need to find silence took him way far away. And finally, when he got there and he was exhausted, God reveals himself to him. And he was in silence and solitude and away from everything, away from the clamor. And God revealed himself, and as you read the story, we know there's an earthquake, there's a fire, there's a wind, and God is in none of those. And then there's a still small voice, and God's in a still small voice. But he had to have that journey away into silence. And in that day and age, it wasn't like he jumped in an Uber and got to the mountain he was finding quickly. It took days and days of walking by himself, of being in silence.
Absolutely. I think of recently I was rereading Nouwen's book on the way of the heart, and where he talks about the desert fathers and mothers, and again, the primacy of silence, solitude, and prayer. But what I loved particularly about it is just what you're saying, Dorian, that we're to bring the desert with us. And I was like,
that's good.
That's really good. That's
good.
Sitting in Panera. That's bringing the desert with you. And that's just been ruminating in me recently. So the ways that we can be in silence in the midst of other noise. I think of that I've been listening to a book recently talking about spiritual practices, and this man lives in the city and has for years, and what it's like. I don't live in the city, so what it's like to live in the city and practice silence, because that's hard to find. Maybe you could go to the library, but and then of course yesterday I walked in the city, and I was thinking about that this is really different, obviously, but how we can bring that inner place into that. So, yeah. So tell us some about your experience of practicing silence with community and others who are doing the same. So I know, Dorian, you just alluded to how hard it was to kind of rejoin community after being in a really good time of silence. And Latha, even, in your practice. But what is it like to practice in community, silence in community? I think many people think that sounds weird, or
because it is weird.
I know. Or very uncomfortable at the least.
Sure.
And it feels that way at first. But I actually found it quite fascinating. What have been your experiences in doing that?
Go ahead.
I actually think it's almost helping me to stay the course when I'm in a sense, with the community of people who are committed to maintaining that silence, because it holds me accountable.
Yeah.
It's easier for me to just say, I'll do it later. I have this great thing I want to do first. All these distractions that are desirable, that we really are our comfort zone, that we tend to hold on to.
Yes.
And it takes a lot of discipline. It's to get into the space, to create the space for God and to be in silence, which is like your soul is in conversation with God, right? Without words.
Right.
And so I just feel when I was in a community, everybody doing it, and then I just felt it was so much easier for me to get into that space and feel like I'm in the presence of God.
Yeah. And when you're, say, in that situation and you would have a meal, did you have a meal with, literally in the room across the table from others in silence?
Yes. So thank you for asking that. Yeah, the setup was that the first 10 days, 9 days, actually it's 10 days, you eat in silence. So you don't even look at the person who's serving you the food or anything. You're just not making eye contact, because even that is smiling at others. Is conversation, it's connection. So that is considered distracting. But on the last day before you're going back home, you're actually breaking the silence. And then there's this whole thing of, service activity that you do in groups. Where you're cleaning up for the next, preparing the rooms for the next batch of people, students who are coming to practice, or whoever's. And so that breaks it, because otherwise I used to love driving. And I generally like driving on long, other than when I'm in a traffic jam and just sitting there. Love driving. And I was driving from Western Mass back home, and it's country roads on a Sunday morning, it's no traffic. And that activity felt stressful to me, because I had been in the zone of completely decompressing, totally out of it.
Interesting.
Yeah. So, and that's why they say it's important to have that, break the silence, do some activity before you head home.
Good.
And not to practice that,
It's kind of a transition point.
It's
for
like
you,
a shock
right?
absorber.
Yes, it is, yeah.
Otherwise, it's too shocking. Everything
Yes.
is too jarring. You're
Yes.
coming back into this. Yeah.
Wow.
It's re-entry training,
Yes,
Yeah,
that's
yeah.
right.
which you need to have.
Yes.
Yeah.
Because it does. The world sounds overbearingly
Yes.
loud
Yeah.
afterwards.
Right.
What Latha said is critical to silence and community. The other people have to understand and have the common commitment. I regularly have gone away for a 3-day prayer retreat with another person, and our days are committed to silence. And there's a comfort in it when you don't feel the need to entertain the other person. And that says more about us when we feel the need we have to fill a void with small talk, which I know is energetic to the extroverts and painful to the introverts. But when you have that common commitment and the accountability of we're doing work with God, and so you can interact with them in that space without communicating. We did meals on different retreats, and I found myself I loved it because at the time we had young kids and there were no silences in meals. So a meal in silence was like a gift.
Oh, yeah, sure.
But there were 30 of us, and I found myself for the first time in a meal looking around the room, and I began to pray for everybody in the room and asking God, what do you see in this person? So I began this communion with God about the other people that I was in silence with. And not everybody likes it because it is weird to sit at a meal and not talk to each other.
Right.
You can actually go to St. John the Evangelist community here in Boston.
Right.
You can book retreats with them. And the requirement of the retreat, anybody can go. You can book a group or a single. But the requirement is if you're there for a meal, you have to eat it with them, and they eat their meals in silence. And it's astounding to just be able to sit there in community, interacting, and you don't need to talk. I think we live in a world that feels like talking is an essential.
Right. Yeah.
And I know we're doing a podcast on silence, and I get the irony.
Right.
But there is something in that allows you differentiation, allows you to think differently about your life.
I did a day of silence with St. John the Evangelist, but on their, it's the North Shore one where they have a place. Anyway, what I found so wonderful, it was one of my first times doing silence in community, and I found it so wonderful because I was uncomfortable, but the brothers were so comfortable that I right away just entered into it and enjoyed it. So their comfort kind of buoyed me and then helped me relax and just enjoy the whole time. And so I'm always grateful for that experience because I think it's one of my first where I thought, how do you do this? This is so strange, I mean, what if I need to ask for the butter? What do you do, right?
Sure.
And it all just worked, and because they're so used to it, yeah. So
a great question I was coached in when going into silence is the question why. Why do I feel the need to talk to this person? Why do I feel the need to interact? What is it within me that needs this affirmation of noise or interaction? Why are we so afraid to just be with ourselves? Because people are afraid of that. We either, I'm oversimplifying this dramatically, but people either avoid looking in the mirror or gaze into the mirror narcissistically as extremes. And there is within this idea of, I don't want to look deep within myself. What if I don't like what's there?
right.
Or I love looking into myself, and so I want to talk about how great I am.
Right.
And silence stops both of those.
Yes, that's great.
Because you can't look into yourself and love yourself and say, now I have to tell everybody, because you're not allowed to.
Right. That's right.
And if you look into yourself and don't like what's there, you have to face that. And maybe there's a little bit of both of those in each of us. Things we love, things we don't love.
Yeah.
The beauty of silence is you get to hear that whisper where God looks at you and goes, I created you. You're exactly what I made. And I want to be with you and we can't hear that voice unless there's silence.
So true. So true. It's funny, too, in silence. I never thought of myself as a particularly anxious person, but going into silence, even having practiced it for quite a while, I remember noticing that I was praying with a certain repetition, which is not a habit I have. At least verbally. And I was like, so going into silence actually made me realize, and saying to God, why am I doing this? What's going on? And the Lord revealing, you're anxious, Laurel. You're anxious. And it's just that internal, again, dialogue, or even crying out to me, praying. And even that was so helpful, because I don't think I would have seen that otherwise, because I didn't feel like I was particularly anxious. So what other kinds of things have been revealed to you while you've been in silence? So you talk about, God's pleasure. That's what I'm saying. Yeah, God's pleasure with you, on you.
Absolutely.
What other kinds of things have you, heard or sensed in the silence? Have you become aware of maybe in the silence? And we'll end with this question, but yeah. Any thoughts?
So I think this practice has actually enabled me to see, like, how, you read these verses and you read it, but you really don't experience it. Mm-hmm. And it's like the kingdom of God is within you. Mm-hmm. God makes his dwelling place in your heart.
Right.
And to see with the eyes of the heart, right? Mm-hmm. All of these, after I started this practice of silence, it's like it has a special aha meaning, moment where you realize the depth of that.
Yes.
What God is saying.
Yes.
And it almost brings to mind, like, when I'm hosting somebody, a guest, I spend, so much time in preparing, cleaning the house, preparing meals, planning. What would they like to do when they hear? What would they like to see in Boston? All these things.
Right.
And yet, I was like, wow, I've invited God into my life, and he's dwelling in my heart. And how often have I created space and thought about spending time with God?
Oh, excellent. Yeah.
It's almost like I'm so busy in my day-to-day life. I do everything else.
Right.
And don't think to sit with in silence with God.
That's right.
And so if I can do that for guests.
Right. What about for God?
And I'm not doing it for God.
That's beautiful.
For so many years, right?
Yes.
Totally unaware.
Absolutely.
You go to church or you listen to the sermon online, whatever.
Yeah.
But how often is that awareness of God being in us?
Right.
And that love of God, right? And the whole essence of, the Bible, Jesus said, love your God and love your neighbor. Right. And the more you love your neighbor, the more you love God.
And vice versa, right?
And vice versa.
That's right.
So for me, it was like this spiritual discipline has actually been the most powerful.
Yes.
In making me feel the love for others, having that awareness and sensing the presence of God in others as well.
Right.
Not just in me.
Yeah, very much so.
And so feeling that connection.
Good.
That's good.
Yeah.
That's good. As I was reflecting on this podcast, I wrote this sentence down that I want to read and then kind of unpack a little. In a multitask world, smothering you for attention, silence gives you the space to breathe. We are in a multitask world where many people have multiple monitors to do their work on because one monitor is just not big enough. And I found myself doing this. You'll sit watching TV, and a commercial break, if you happen to be on one of the streaming services that requires you to watch commercial breaks, they become irritating. So what do? Well, it's a 45-second break. You know what? I'll pick up my phone.
Exactly.
And then you're on your phone while the TV's going and your computer's on, and it's multitasking, but it's not really multitasking. It's just pandemonium. And silence gives you the space to turn all of that off and breathe. And we talk about people talk about, I'm feeling smothered, I'm feeling inundated from commercials, adverts, demands, spouses, children, parents. We talk about my age is called the sandwich generation, right? Because we've got parents who are trying to care for and kids who demands. And when you feel like the world is encroaching on you, silence is the antidote that gives you the space to breathe. Nothing else can do that for you.
Right.
And it's why it's helpful to practice it daily, 30 seconds, 2 minutes, set a clock, pause, an hour, morning, hour in the evening. Weekly, for me, my Sabbath has become a ritual where I don't talk. In fact, the weeks when my kids are home, like summer vacation, man, that's tough. Because they're there and they're talking, and I'm like, you need to go away. So my day off has become a time where I kind of count the hours where I haven't said anything. Now, sure, I might watch a show or do something, but I'm not interacting, not giving to someone. And then those yearly retreats are critical. Those are the spaces that, for me, they allow me to breathe. And I can feel like a frayed rope. I can feel my soul and my mind and my body when I don't get the silence. And everybody else can feel it too, because I get frustrated and irritable. And you may have felt it from me in our meetings.
And you may have felt it from me.
But it's not intentional. It's not that I'm not liking somebody, but I'm irritable because I haven't had that time with God.
Yeah, it's true.
And I think my spirit knows I haven't had it, so my spirit is irritable about there's somebody who you love who you haven't spent time with.
Exactly.
Absolutely, yeah. So true. This has been great. Thank you both for your time, your insight, and also just sharing your practice with us. I hope this encourages everyone to try this. A great time during Holy Week is even Good Friday to take the time to practice some silence. Try 5 minutes. Try half an hour, or even the whole day if you can. And the day, the Holy Saturday before Easter Sunday, I know people are often doing preparations, but oh my gosh, where it feels like to me like the world was silent, just hanging. What was going to happen here? So thank you for joining us, and this concludes our Lenten podcast series. Hope to see you soon.
Thank you for checking out this episode of Divergent Hope, a podcast produced by Faith Community Church. Wherever you're listening, we invite you to leave a review. We welcome all your feedback. If you want to get connected, visit us at faithma.online.church. See you soon.